Some characters' names and events may have been changed for dramatic effect and to protect the guilty. From NBM to DNR, Book 1, Chapter 3, Out into the World. I'm glad to see you back again, and welcome to any newbies to this series. The links to chapters 1 and 2 are in the description below. Please check them out, like, share and subscribe. So 1964 arrived, and with it the inconvenient expectation that I should now leave the relative safety of school and become something resembling a responsible member of society. At 16 I was officially let loose on the world. I say let loose because no one, least of all me, seemed entirely sure what I was meant to do next. I'd always wanted to work at Heathrow Airport, preferably with my dad, but he talked me out of that because working for the Civil Aviation Authority would make me a government employee. I think he was disenchanted with anything to do with the ruling classes at that time, a sentiment that I inherited from him in later life. Dad never spoke of his politics, if any. At the same time, he never talked about his service in the Second World War. Even though Susan and I would try to pump him about his wartime heroics, he steadfastly refused to give anything away. I also believe that most of his generation were the same, and can only surmise that it would have been too traumatic for them to relive those years. The military, particularly the RAF, was out of the question, as I had no qualifications, and national service had been discontinued in 1960, with the last conscript denobbed in 1963. My Welsh cousin Arthur, who had been held up as a paragon for me to emulate, if only I could just apply my mind and effort into my schooling. I resented the pedestal that he was on, as I did my sisters. As I've mentioned many times, I was a lazy sod who was perfectly happy just to play around, and not in that way, you smutty lot. Arthur is nearly 5 years older than me and enjoyed a good career in the RAF. He was involved in authoring the manuals for the RAF Sea King search and rescue helicopter. So Civvy Street was my only option, but careers advice in those days was less structured, consisting mainly of watching the regular school TV programme Going to Work. These were weekly 30-minute films featuring various jobs available at that time. Most were humdrum factory positions, but some were more ambitious: accounting, soliciting in both senses of the word, and the police, along with the other emergency services. Well, numbers were out, as was physical exertion too, but one career caught my fancy: the printing industry. With so many facets of the job, typesetting, galleys, proofreading, print machines, paper, ink, what's not to love? So that's what I set my sights on. But the best laid plans of mice and men. Armed with no qualifications, a slightly improved attitude, and a great deal of uncertainty, I found myself stepping out of Swalcliffe and back into a world that felt both familiar and completely different. Due to getting a reasonable offer from housing developers and avoiding a compulsory purchase order, my family had moved from Heston to a new build in Maidenhead, Berkshire, during my final summer term. So on my leaving day in July, I was taken to Banbury Station, given tickets for rail travel to Oxford, then Reading and on to Maidenhead, before being met by my mum at the small market town station. It seemed so much easier to consult timetables and departure boards in the 60s, less complicated and confusing. A quick bus ride and a short walk, then I saw my new home, a detached house on a new development with a much smaller garden that needed a lot of uphill landscaping. I worked with Dad in the garden as much as possible, and he was planting 3 terraces of grass and bedding plants with fantail apple trees supported on wires along the back fence. It was back-breaking work at times, but satisfying too. Getting ready to begin my money-making career, maybe. The summer of '64 was glorious, and with a new bicycle I explored this strange area extensively to get my bearings. I even frequented the airfield at nearby White Waltham to continue my aeroplane passion. I was missing my regular trips to Heathrow whilst on school holidays. We explored as much as Berkshire when Dad was at work that public transport allowed. Sonning-on-Thames near Reading was a great favourite, along with Winter Hill near Marlow. All great fun, but the comforting structure of school life had been replaced by something far less forgiving, the need to earn a living. This, as it turned out, was where the real education began. The home life I knew in Heston wasn't there anymore, but Mum, Dad, Susan and my long-widowed Nana were, along with the routines that had carried on quite happily without me. I, however, was no longer quite the same person who had left it. My first attempts at employment were not, it would be fair to say, a resounding success. A planned appointment with the local youth employment officer was a big disappointment for me. There were no apprenticeships for printing available in the area, but one place in an allied trade, bookbinding, was open. Family discussions followed, during which time a position as a telegram boy for the General Post Office in Windsor was advertised in the Maidenhead Advertiser. Promising to teach the successful candidate to ride a motorcycle as part of the training, I thought only of the excitement, and I wanted to be that candidate. A bus ride to Windsor, an interview and an aptitude test later, the head postmaster offered me the job, saying that I was the most suitable candidate he had seen. I was over the moon and somewhat swelled up with pride. But family discussions continued, with the voices of reasons pointing out all the downsides of this job: distance to work, transport issues, bad weather, winter or even summer, and the danger of motorcycles and the lack of a real trade to depend on. So I buckled and decided to take the bookbinding apprenticeship after all. It was suggested that I could transfer to printing later should a place become available. I had to be interviewed again, and Dad had to sign the papers enrolling me to be tied to 5 years cheap labour, providing I learned the skills and attended day release in Reading, along with evening classes in Maidenhead once a week. Bookbinding is an ancient and highly skilled craft, and with my indentures completed, I would be able to virtually print my own salaries, which brings me back to printing for later. I don't remember the exact date, but on the Monday morning I duly clocked in at 7:30 at the local printer's electrical press in the Cornwallis Industrial Estate. After a short induction and donning oversized boiler suit overalls, I was tasked with assisting the ladies operating the paper folding machines. These strange and noisy contraptions were shaped like metal bedsteads with rollers, folding blades and all sorts of guides and clamps. Large printed sheets were hand-fed by the ladies, then travelled up the inside of the upright section, creating a crease, before being fed into blades and rollers which chopped and folded them further into sections, depending on the number of pages the publication required. I was shown how to gather and stack these bundles in groups of 25 or quires. Routine and regular oiling of these machines was within my remit also, but I found myself being admonished on more than one occasion for over-oiling, which made the paper stained and sometimes unusable. Over-lubrication was something that would blight me throughout my later life. Learning was hard for me too, Day release classes demanded more with numbers than I was comfortable with, and I found myself becoming increasingly disheartened. But as time went on, I learned the practical side, setting up and operating the manual folders and the new automatic folder, stapling or stitching machines, and the rather ominous three-bladed guillotine used to trim finished magazines and books. Unloading the regular lorries of paper in the varying sizes, great reams of 500 sheets in bad weather, was not exactly enjoyable, but strength building and absolutely necessary for the smooth running of the firm. All talk of transferring to the print shop gradually evaporated, and I resigned myself to a life of being bound, forgive me, in the paraphernalia of the bookbinding craft. And then I met a girl, the girl. For a lad with very limited experience of girls before attending an all-boys boarding school, this was a strange phenomenon indeed. I'd previously been friends in the strict sense with a nice girl at the end of my junior schooling and up to when I was expelled from my secondary modern and going away. And at the end of '64 I went out with another girl who I'd met at a dance for about 4 months, but that fizzled out mainly through my fault. This was the mid-60s after all, and the so-called sexual revolution was still largely theoretical for most. I won't be divulging any lurid details of my relationship with the girl, other than I believed her to be the girl for me. I'm told she felt the same, and we spent as much time together as was possible, even if that involved failing to report for work, day release or evening classes. By this time I had scrimped together enough money to buy my first of many guitars I would own, an acoustic costing £5 pre-decimal currency from Pro Musica in Queen Street, Maidenhead. Plunged myself into the arduous task of learning and perfecting the 3 chords that would enable me to play any rock and roll song of the era. Occasionally a 4th or even 5th chord was needed, so that took a back seat for a while. I did say in chapter 1 that I was a reluctant so-and-so. By the age of 18 I had left home and was fending for myself in bedsit land, on an apprentice's pittance that was far from ideal, and without any parental guiding hand I drifted further off course. My attendance record plummeted, and eventually my parents were summoned to a meeting with my general manager to determine whether my apprenticeship would continue. Not for the last time. I was called into the office to formalise the termination of my employment and the end of my career. Not the best of times again, and back to job hunting, a skill, as it turned out, I was about to become very familiar with. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Some characters and names and events may have been changed for dramatic effect and to protect the guilty. From NBM to DNR, Book 1, Chapter 4, Error and the Occasional Full Wage Packet. If there's one thing I quickly discovered about job hunting, is that finding a job is one thing, finding the right job is something else entirely. Over the next 3 or 4 years, I would work my way through a small but memorable collection of employment opportunities, each one teaching me something useful, even if that something was simply, "This definitely isn't for me." My older sister Susan had left her grammar school and was attending a teacher training college near Bromsgrove, Worcestershire, and well on her way to becoming a biology teacher. It was inconceivable to Mum and Dad that I would become a long-term unemployed sponger on the state, and to a certain degree it was not in my make-up either. I will proudly state this now, and probably more than once throughout this narrative, that for all my times of being between jobs, I have never received unemployment benefit from the governments of the day. Statutory sickness pay and my state pension are my only monetary dealings with the state. It should be pointed out that in the 60s and 70s one could virtually walk out of or be sacked from a job, walk into the reception of any firm, ask if they've got any jobs, be interviewed and maybe take an aptitude test to be starting with that firm possibly the very next day. A far cry from today's unfeeling and downright rude society where an application for a position is not even acknowledged by inconsiderate firms who manage so-called HR departments. These people would not even have been considered for a job in the personnel offices of my day. The first placement that I found was as a book packer at American publishers McGraw-Hill near the M4 spur in Maidenhead. Wages were paid fortnightly by cheque, meaning that I needed to open my first bank account. I cannot remember which one, but it's enough to say that they were not in the business of helping you then, as of now, but the earnings were twice as much as my apprentice's salary. Work was not physically demanding, but monotonous. Opportunities for advancement were limited, so my tenure there was quite short, about 6 months only. Living in digs and feeding the nasty habit of cigarette smoking dictated the need for greater wages. A clean change was on the cards. So visiting the Employment Exchange, now laughingly known as Job Centre Plus, and scouring the local paper, I secured a lorry loading and warehouse job with Brillo, the soap pad company, promising more money but with limited room for improvement. I began to slide back into the old habits of poor timekeeping and absenteeism. Workmates were few, and even they began to shun me, once my unreliability meant that it would be more work for them. A lesson for us all there. With many warnings, verbal and written, and then the final warning, I was not wanting to be fired again. I was spurred into job hunting once more. My girlfriend Marilyn and I were seriously eating up all available spare time to be together and not saving funds for the future. But being young and invincible, I did nothing to correct the situation. 1967, the year of flower power and free love, there's a joke, for no love is free. I had changed my acoustic guitar for an electric one, an amp combo. Being able to play louder did not help me play better. Still, with the 5 or 6 chords, I felt that I had a good rhythm. My vocals were reedy and not necessarily in tune, but I still thought that I could be a rock god eventually, perhaps. Strangely, a group of mismatched guys had formed a band inviting me to join them, and they said they had a wedding to play at 6 weeks hence. Practice was essential. The singer was aged about 45 and obviously well versed in cabaret-style singing. The drums were played by a lad of my age who thought he was Keith Moon. I'll have to be honest and say that I can't remember if we even had another guitarist or what sort of player he was. Then there was me, a novice musician with very limited ability and no desire to thrust myself to the front of the stage. With a repertoire of only 6 practice songs, I remember 3 of the numbers: the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, Jim Reeves' Distant Drums, and the Shadows' Apache. We presented ourselves on stage, with me filled with trepidation. Not long into the 3rd time of performing our set, the main fuse blew. There was nothing we could do except for me to go round all the tables and apologise to the wedding guests, who looked as if they were physically relieved, pack up our gear and hightail it out of there. And while we were stowing our equipment, a man who claimed to be a promoter or similar came to us to comment that we were okay, but way too loud. Needless to say, he didn't offer to sign us up for a world tour or even Maidenhead. I like to believe that once we were gone, someone switched the power back on and enjoyed the rest of the evening, safe in the knowledge that their bleeding ears would soon heal and recover some normality. Oh, the shame. I swore never to join a band again and just continued to play my stuff at home alone. But the lure of the limelight was too great, and a while later I started following and assisting some of the other local groups, also taking a couple of guest vocal spots and hoping that they'd take me in. Luckily for them, they had more sense, so I was gently dumped by the wayside. Guitar playing took a back seat for some time, though I did continue to learn more chords, but it would be many years before a wider audience had the mischance to see or even hear me in any public performance. So back to the grindstone that is regular employment. Velcro binders were my next victims. This company manufactured ring binders and was looking for a guillotine operator to cut the boards. With more than a hint of bravado, I've convinced the manager that my limited experience of the potentially fatal machines was more than the cursory training I had received during my part apprenticeship as a bookbinder. Health and safety was pie in the sky in those days. The work again was joyless and repetitive, and my mind was always elsewhere, dreaming of I don't know what. Lateness and absenteeism continued to spoil my record, with my manager becoming increasingly exasperated with me. Coupled with that, I fell in with the wrong people with whom I shared digs. The excitement of petty crime still haunted me, even in the knowledge that it would never end well. As time went on, and I'm not proud of it, the petty crime became more felonious, and eventually my cohorts were arrested by the police while I was elsewhere. I was now between homes, knowing that it was only a matter of time before my collar would be felt, instead of the usual velvet. On the run, in hiding, and a very cold night on a local park bench convinced me, with my tail between my legs, to throw myself on Mum and Dad's mercy, begging to be able to come back home. After lying to them that I wasn't in any trouble, they gave me back my bedroom and my family home to live in, with certain ground rules about attending work and jobs around the house once more. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, comment and share, and I'll see you on the run for chapter 5 shortly.